the day my future daughter-in-law told me I wasn't pretty enough for her wedding photos. She actually asked me to skip my own son's wedding because my appearance would ruin her perfect aesthetic. What she didn't know was that this old nurse had connections, resources, and a backbone made of steel. By the time I was done, her perfect wedding became a lesson she'd never forget. Before I get into what happened at the wedding, I need to tell you about my son Trevor and how he met Madison, because understanding their relationship is key to understanding why things went the way they did. Trevor was my youngest child, born 3 years after Marcus. Where Marcus was serious and studious, Trevor was my social butterfly, my charmer, my boy who could make friends with anyone. He had Henry's easy smile and my stubborn determination, a combination that served him well in life. Trevor went into sales after college and was phenomenally successful at it. He could sell ice to folks living in Alaska, as my mama used to say. By the time he was 30, he was making 6 figures, driving a luxury car, living in a beautiful condo downtown. But Trevor's success came with a price. He worked constantly, traveled for business, and his relationships suffered for it. He'd date women for a few months, then things would fizzle out because he was never around. I worried about him, worried he'd end up alone, married to his career. Then he met Madison at a work conference in Miami. Madison was 26, 4 years younger than Trevor, and she worked in marketing for a competitor company. Trevor called me the night they met, more excited than I'd heard him in years. He said he'd met someone special, someone who understood the demands of his career because she had the same ambitions. They dated long distance for 6 months before Madison relocated to our city for a job opportunity. Trevor was over the moon. He brought her to meet me about a week after she moved. Now, honey, I want to be clear about something before I continue. I'm not a judgmental person by nature. I've seen enough of life to know that people come in all varieties, and that's what makes the world interesting. But from the moment Madison walked into my house, something felt off. She was beautiful, no question about that. Tall and thin with perfect hair and perfect makeup and perfect clothes. Everything about her screamed expensive and curated. But when she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes. She complimented my house, but I caught her looking at my outdated furniture with thinly veiled disdain. She asked polite questions about my nursing career, but I could tell she wasn't really listening to my answers. She took several phone calls during dinner, each time apologizing but not actually seeming sorry. Trevor watched her like she hung the moon and stars. He laughed at everything she said, constantly touched her arm or shoulder, and looked at her with such adoration that it made my heart hurt a little, because I could see he was more invested than she was. After they left, Henry, this was before he passed, turned to me and said that Madison seemed nice enough but that she wore a mask. He said he hoped Trevor would see behind it before he got too serious. Henry was right to worry, but Trevor was already too far gone to see clearly. Over the next year, I watched my son change to accommodate Madison's preferences. Trevor had always been casual, comfortable in jeans and a t-shirt on weekends. Madison preferred he dress more upscale, so suddenly he was wearing designer casual wear even to run errands. Trevor loved sports bars and dive restaurants with good food and cold beer. Madison preferred trendy restaurants with small portions and high prices, so that's where they went. Trevor had a close group of friends from college he'd maintained for years. Madison thought they were immature and beneath Trevor's current status, so gradually those friendships faded. I watched my fun-loving, easygoing son become someone more polished and refined, but also more stressed and less himself. When I gently mentioned that he seemed different, he said he was growing up, becoming more sophisticated. He said Madison was helping him reach his full potential. I bit my tongue, because what could I say? That I preferred my son when he was less polished but more genuine? That Madison seemed to be molding him into someone else? He was happy, or at least he seemed happy, and who was I to judge? Then Henry died, and I saw a side of Madison that confirmed all my unspoken concerns. At Henry's funeral, Madison stayed glued to her phone. She'd step outside during the service to take calls. She complained about the food at the repast. She told Trevor they needed to leave early because she had a work dinner she couldn't miss. My husband had just died, and Madison couldn't skip one work dinner to support Trevor in his grief. Trevor made excuses for her, saying she was under a lot of pressure at work, that she wasn't good with emotions, that she showed love in different ways than traditional people. I didn't argue with him. He was grieving his father, and I wasn't going to make it harder by criticizing his girlfriend. 6 months after Henry's death, Trevor proposed to Madison. He took her to Paris, proposed at the top of the Eiffel Tower, bought her a ring that must have cost 3 months of his salary. She said yes, posted pictures on social media immediately, and started planning what she called the wedding of the century. Trevor called to tell me the news, and I could hear the joy in his voice. He said he'd never been happier, that Madison was his future, that he couldn't wait to start their life together. I told him I was happy for him and that I looked forward to welcoming Madison into our family officially. I meant it too. Whatever my reservations about Madison, she was going to be my daughter-in-law. I was determined to build a good relationship with her, to be the kind of mother-in-law who was supportive and loving, not interfering and critical. The wedding planning began immediately. Madison had apparently been planning her dream wedding since she was a little girl, and she had very specific ideas about every detail. The venue had to be a particular historic estate that was booked years in advance. Madison pulled strings through her work connections to get it. The guest list was to be exactly 200 people, no more, no less. The color scheme was blush pink and champagne gold. The flowers had to be peonies and garden roses, regardless of season or cost. The dress was a designer gown that cost more than my first car. Trevor went along with everything, writing checks and nodding agreement. When I asked him privately if this was what he wanted, he said he just wanted Madison to be happy, that the wedding was more important to her than to him, and that he'd do anything to make her dreams come true. I didn't say what I was thinking, that marriage was supposed to be about compromise and both partners' dreams, not just one person's vision with the other person bankrolling it. Madison asked me to go dress shopping with her and her mother about 3 months before the wedding. I was touched that she wanted to include me, and thought maybe this was a sign that we'd have a good relationship after all. Her mother, Patricia, was essentially an older version of Madison, same thin frame, same perfect appearance, same air of barely concealed judgment about anyone who didn't meet her standards. We went to an upscale bridal boutique where the dresses started at $3,000. Madison tried on dress after dress, each one more elaborate than the last. She'd come out of the dressing room, pose in front of the three-way mirror, and Patricia would critique every detail. Too much lace, not enough sparkle, the train wasn't long enough, the neckline was too low, the silhouette didn't photograph well. After the 5th or 6th dress, Madison asked what I thought. I told her honestly that she looked beautiful in all of them, and that she should choose whichever one made her feel most special. Madison gave me this look, like I'd just proven I had no taste or understanding of fashion. Patricia actually laughed and said that was sweet, but that Madison needed constructive feedback, not generic platitudes. I felt dismissed and small, but I kept smiling. Then Madison turned to the consultant and asked about mother of the bride and mother of the groom dresses. The consultant showed us a selection of appropriate formal wear in the wedding colors. Patricia immediately found a dress she loved, a champagne-colored floor-length gown that probably cost $1,000. She asked Madison for approval, and Madison clapped her hands and said it was perfect. Then it was my turn to look. I found a few options in my size and price range. None of them were as expensive or elaborate as Patricia's choice, but they were nice dresses that would photograph well and fit the formal nature of the wedding. I showed Madison my top choice, a burgundy floor-length dress with a modest neckline and some beading detail. I thought it was elegant and appropriate. Madison's face fell. She looked at Patricia, who also looked displeased. Madison said that burgundy wasn't in the color palette. I pointed out that the store had said mothers didn't have to wear the wedding colors exactly, just complimentary formal wear. Madison said that was technically true, but for her wedding she really needed everything to be cohesive. She asked if I could find something in blush pink or champagne. I looked through the options again. The dresses in those colors were mostly styles for younger women or much thinner women. Nothing fit me properly or looked appropriate for a woman my age. The consultant tried to help, bringing out more options, but Madison vetoed each one. Too dark, wrong style, not elegant enough, too old-fashioned. After an hour of this, I was exhausted and frustrated. I asked Madison to just tell me what she wanted me to wear, and I'd find something that matched her vision. Madison said she'd think about it and get back to me. We left the boutique with Patricia's dress purchased and mine still undecided. 2 weeks later, Madison called and asked if she could come over to talk. I said of course, thinking maybe she'd found the perfect dress for me. Madison arrived looking uncomfortable, which should have been my first warning. She sat in my living room, declined my offer of coffee or tea, and said she needed to discuss something difficult regarding the wedding. She started by saying how much she respected me and how grateful she was that I'd raised such a wonderful man. She said she knew I'd been a good mother and that Trevor loved me very much. Then she said that she'd been thinking about the photos. Wedding photos were extremely important to her, she explained. She'd hired one of the top photographers in the state, someone who cost $5,000 just for the day. She wanted the photos to be perfect, something she'd treasure forever. She said she'd been looking at photos from other weddings and noticed how the overall aesthetic could be thrown off by guests who didn't fit the visual theme. She pulled out her phone and showed me examples of wedding photos where, according to her, certain guests looked out of place. The guests, she pointed out, were all overweight, older, or not conventionally attractive. My stomach started to sink as I realized where this was going. Madison said that she'd been thinking about the family photos specifically, and she had a concern. She said that Patricia would photograph well next to her because they had similar builds and coloring. But she was worried about the photos with me. She didn't say I was too fat. She didn't say I was too old or too ugly, but she implied all of it. She said that because I was plus-sized and because I was older and because I had a different aesthetic than her vision for the wedding, I might not photograph well. She said the contrast between Patricia and me standing on either side of her and Trevor might be jarring and could ruin the photos. Then, honey, she suggested that maybe it would be better if I didn't come to the wedding. She said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. She said she knew it was unconventional, but she'd heard of other brides doing this. She said I could watch via live stream instead. She said she'd make sure Trevor and I had a special dinner before the wedding so I didn't miss out on celebrating with him. She said it would be better for everyone this way. The photos would be perfect. I wouldn't have to spend money on an expensive dress or feel uncomfortable being photographed. Trevor would understand because he wanted her to be happy. I sat there in my living room, listening to this young woman tell me I wasn't pretty enough or thin enough to attend my own son's wedding, and I felt something inside me go cold and hard. I asked her if Trevor knew she was here having this conversation. She said not yet, but that she'd talk to him about it and help him understand. I asked her if she really expected me to miss my son's wedding because I didn't fit her aesthetic vision. She said she knew it was difficult to understand, but that this was her special day and she needed everything to be perfect. I told her I needed time to think about it. She looked relieved, like she'd expected me to make a scene. She hugged me on her way out and said she knew I'd do the right thing. After she left, I sat in my living room for an hour, just processing what had happened. Part of me couldn't believe it was real. Part of me wanted to call Trevor immediately and tell him what his fiancée had done. But I didn't call Trevor, because I realized that if I did, he'd be put in an impossible position. He'd probably try to convince Madison to change her mind, they'd fight, and one of two things would happen. Either Madison would give in resentfully and hate me forever, or Trevor would side with her and our relationship would be damaged. No, honey, I needed to handle this differently. I called my friend Dorothy, the one who'd been with me through so many crises. I told her what had happened. She was furious on my behalf, calling Madison names I won't repeat here. But after we'd both vented, Dorothy said something wise. She said that Madison had shown me exactly who she was, and now I had a choice. I could expose her cruelty and risk my relationship with Trevor, or I could find another way to make my point. That's when I started planning. First, I called Trevor and told him I'd heard from Madison about the wedding photos. I said I understood she had a very specific vision and that I didn't want to cause any problems. I said I'd been thinking about it, and maybe it would be better if I had a smaller role in the ceremony and photos. Trevor was immediately concerned. He asked what Madison had said to me. I played it down, saying she'd just mentioned being particular about photos and that I understood because it was her special day. Trevor said that was ridiculous, that of course I was coming to the wedding and would be in all the family photos. He said he'd talk to Madison about it. I told him not to worry about it, that Madison and I would work it out. I could hear the relief in his voice. He didn't want conflict between his mother and his fiancée, and I'd just given him an easy out. Next, I called Madison and told her I'd thought about her request. I said I understood her concerns about the photos and that I wanted her wedding to be perfect. I said I'd come to the ceremony but that I'd be happy to step out of the formal family photos if that would make things easier. Madison was thrilled. She said she knew I'd understand, that I was being so gracious and reasonable. She said she'd make sure I still felt included and special on the day. I told her that was sweet and that I couldn't wait to celebrate her and Trevor. Then I put the real plan into motion. I'd been a nurse for 30 years, remember. I knew a lot of people in the medical community. I also knew a lot of people in the wider community from my church, my volunteer work, my years of living in this city. And honey, I decided to call in every favor I'd ever earned. I reached out to my friend Carmen, who owned a successful catering company. I told her what had happened and asked if she'd be willing to help me. Carmen was outraged and immediately said yes. I contacted my former nursing supervisor, Dr. Michelle Harrison, who'd gone on to become chief of staff at the major hospital in town. She was furious when I told her the story and asked what she could do to help. I called my pastor, Reverend Williams, who'd known Trevor since he was born. He listened to the whole story and said that while he couldn't condone revenge, he could certainly condone teaching someone a valuable lesson about respect and dignity. I reached out to my friend Thomas, who was a prominent attorney in town. He and his husband were pillars of the community and knew everyone worth knowing. I contacted Evelyn, whose daughter-in-law was the society editor for the city's major newspaper. I called Dorothy's son, who was a professional photographer and videographer. One by one, I explained the situation and asked for help, and one by one, every single person said yes. Here's what we did. Carmen donated her services to cater a special celebration dinner for 50 people to be held the same evening as Madison's wedding. The dinner would honor healthcare workers, teachers, and community volunteers, real people doing real work, people of all sizes, ages, and appearances. Dr. Harrison helped me identify which of her staff members would most appreciate being honored. She also agreed to attend and bring several other doctors from the hospital. Reverend Williams offered the church fellowship hall as a venue at no cost. Thomas and his husband, who were very social and knew every important person in the city, agreed to attend and to spread the word about the event through their networks. Evelyn's daughter-in-law, the society editor, arranged for the newspaper to cover our celebration dinner as a human interest story about honoring unsung heroes in the community. Dorothy's son agreed to photograph and video our event professionally, with the footage and photos to be shared widely on social media. And here's the key part, honey. I scheduled our celebration dinner for the exact same evening as Madison's wedding, and I invited Trevor. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called Trevor and asked if he could come by the house. When he arrived, I sat him down and told him everything. I told him about Madison asking me to skip the wedding because I'd ruin the photos. I told him about her showing me pictures of other weddings and pointing out guests she thought didn't fit the aesthetic. I told him about her suggestion that I watch via live stream instead. I watched my son's face as I talked, disbelief, anger, hurt, and finally a kind of defeated sadness. He asked why I hadn't told him immediately. I said because I didn't want to put him in the middle, and because I needed him to hear this from me calmly rather than in the heat of the moment. Trevor said he'd had no idea Madison felt this way. He said she'd told him that I'd volunteered to have a smaller role in the wedding, that it was my choice. I asked him if he really believed that. After a long pause, he admitted he hadn't quite believed it, but he'd wanted to believe it because the alternative was too awful. Then I told him about the celebration dinner I'd planned. I told him it was scheduled for the same night as his wedding and that I'd be attending that event instead of his ceremony. Trevor started to protest, saying he wanted me at his wedding, that he'd talk to Madison and fix this. I stopped him. I said that the problem wasn't just Madison's words, it was her values. She saw people as aesthetic elements rather than human beings. She valued appearance over character. And if he married her without addressing these fundamental issues, he'd be signing up for a lifetime of her making decisions based on how things looked rather than what was right. I told him I would always love him and support him, but I couldn't attend a wedding where the bride had made it clear I wasn't welcome. I had too much self-respect for that. I said that if he wanted to postpone the wedding and take time to really evaluate his relationship with Madison, I'd support that. If he wanted to go through with the wedding and work on these issues afterward, I'd support that too. But I would not pretend Madison hadn't hurt me. And I would not skip my own community celebration to attend a wedding where I'd been told I'd ruin the photos. Trevor sat in my living room and cried. He said he didn't know what to do, that he loved Madison but that he was seeing sides of her he'd ignored before. He said he needed time to think, and I told him to take all the time he needed. The next week was tense. Trevor called Madison and confronted her about what she'd said to me. According to Trevor, she initially denied saying anything so harsh, then minimized it, then finally said she'd just been trying to make the photos look cohesive and that I'd misunderstood her intentions. She said she'd never actually told me not to come to the wedding. She said I was being dramatic and trying to cause problems. Trevor didn't know who to believe, even though he knew in his heart that I wasn't a dramatic person and that I had no reason to lie. Madison called me, crying, saying there'd been a misunderstanding. She said she'd never meant to hurt me, that she'd just been stressed about wedding planning and maybe she'd worded things poorly. She begged me to come to the wedding and be in the photos. I told her I appreciated her apology, but that I'd already committed to the community celebration dinner. I said it was important work honoring important people, and I wouldn't back out now. She got angry then, asking why I was doing this to her and Trevor. I said I wasn't doing anything to them. I was simply making a choice to attend an event where I was genuinely wanted rather than an event where I'd been told I'd ruin the aesthetic. She hung up on me. Patricia called next, saying I was being unreasonable and vindictive, that I was ruining her daughter's special day out of spite. I told Patricia that her daughter had tried to exclude me from the wedding for being too fat and too old, and that if she saw nothing wrong with that, it explained a lot about Madison. Patricia said looks mattered in this world, and that Madison was just being practical. I told her character mattered more, and I hung up. The local newspaper published a front-page story 3 days before the wedding about the community celebration dinner honoring healthcare workers, teachers, and volunteers. The article mentioned me by name as one of the organizers and included photos of some of the honorees, people of all sizes, ages, and backgrounds who'd made real differences in people's lives. The article was shared thousands of times on social media. People commented about how wonderful it was to celebrate real heroes. Several prominent people in town publicly stated they'd be attending. Madison's friends saw the article and put together that her future mother-in-law was skipping the wedding to attend this other event. Questions started being asked. 2 days before the wedding, Trevor called. He said he'd made a decision. He said he'd been thinking about his relationship with Madison, really examining it honestly for the first time. He'd realized that she'd been changing him, isolating him from friends and family, making him into someone he didn't quite recognize. He said the situation with me had been the final straw. He'd asked Madison directly if she'd really asked me to skip the wedding, and she'd admitted she had but insisted she'd been trying to prevent awkwardness and drama. Trevor had asked her if she understood why that was hurtful and wrong. She'd said she understood why I was upset, but that sometimes people's feelings had to take a back seat to practical concerns about how things would look. That phrase, how things would look, had made something click for Trevor. He'd realized that their entire relationship was about how things looked. They looked perfect together. Their lives looked enviable. Their wedding would look beautiful. But it wasn't real. It was a performance. Trevor told Madison he couldn't marry her. He said he loved her, or thought he did, but that he didn't like who he was becoming with her. He said he needed someone who valued people over appearances, someone who'd defend his family rather than insult them. Madison was shocked. She cried and promised to change. She said she'd apologize to me properly, that she'd make it right. Trevor said it was too late for that. The wedding was called off. Honey, the chaos that followed was something else. Madison's parents threatened to sue Trevor for the wedding expenses. Madison posted a vague message on social media about being betrayed by the person she trusted most. Her friends flooded Trevor's phone with angry messages calling him names I won't repeat. But Trevor also got messages of support from people who'd heard what happened. Friends he'd lost touch with reached out, saying they were glad to see him standing up for what was right. Family members called to thank him for not going through with a marriage that clearly wasn't healthy. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, most couldn't refund deposits, so Trevor lost tens of thousands of dollars. He said it was worth every penny to not make a terrible mistake. Madison moved back to Miami within a month. Trevor heard through mutual friends that she'd told everyone he'd developed cold feet and abandoned her at the altar, that she was the victim in all of this. As for the community celebration dinner, it was beautiful. 50 people attended, every single one of them making a genuine difference in our community. We honored nurses who'd worked double shifts during the pandemic, teachers who'd spent their own money on supplies for low-income students, volunteers who ran food banks and homeless shelters. The event was covered not just in the local paper but picked up by regional news as a feel-good story. The photos showed real people of all shapes, sizes, ages, and colors, people with character and substance and stories worth telling. Trevor attended. He stood up during the dinner and gave a speech about how his mother had taught him that a person's worth had nothing to do with their appearance and everything to do with their actions. He said he was grateful for the lesson, even though it had come at a painful price. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Now let me tell you where things stand today, 3 years after these events. Trevor is doing well. He took some time after breaking off the engagement to figure out who he really was and what he really wanted. He went to therapy to work through how he'd lost himself in that relationship. He reconnected with old friends he'd pushed away. About a year after the canceled wedding, he started dating a woman named Rachel, who's a social worker. She's plus-sized, wears minimal makeup, and has a laugh that could wake the dead. She's genuine and kind and pushes Trevor to be his best self while loving exactly who he is. They got engaged 6 months ago, and the wedding is next spring. Rachel has asked me to help her plan it, and honey, we're having fun with it. No stress about aesthetics or perfect photos. Just a celebration of love with people who matter. Trevor still sees Madison occasionally at industry events since they're in similar fields. She's engaged to someone else now, a man who apparently checks all her aesthetic boxes. Trevor wishes her well from a distance. As for the community celebration dinner, it became an annual event. Every year, we honor different people who make our city better. It's grown to over 100 attendees and has become a respected tradition. The second year we held it, we received a donation from an anonymous source to help cover costs. The note with the donation said simply that it came from someone who'd learned an important lesson about what really matters in life. I suspect it was from Patricia, though I'll never know for sure. I'd like to think that even someone as concerned with appearances as she was could eventually see the error in valuing how people look over who they are. Now let me tell you what I learned from all this, because there are important lessons here. First, know your worth. When Madison told me I'd ruin her wedding photos, I could have internalized that message. I could have believed that my appearance was something to be ashamed of. Instead, I knew my value had nothing to do with whether I fit her aesthetic standards. Second, teach people how to treat you. If I'd agreed to skip the wedding, I'd have taught Madison that she could bully me into compliance. I'd have taught Trevor that it was acceptable for his partner to disrespect his family. By standing firm, I taught them both that I expected to be treated with dignity. Third, you can be kind while still having boundaries. I didn't trash Madison publicly. I didn't try to sabotage her wedding out of spite. I simply created an alternative that honored my values and gave Trevor a chance to see the situation clearly. Fourth, sometimes the right choice is the hardest choice. Trevor lost tens of thousands of dollars and faced social backlash for calling off that wedding. But he made the right choice for his long-term happiness and integrity. And finally, real beauty comes from character, not appearance. Those 50 people we honored at that first community celebration dinner, they were beautiful. Not because they fit some narrow aesthetic standard, but because they'd chosen to make the world better. When Madison looks at her wedding photos with her new fiancé, they'll probably be perfect. Perfectly composed, perfectly lit, perfectly edited. Everyone will fit her aesthetic vision. But those photos will be empty compared to the photos from our community celebrations. Our photos show real smiles, real joy, real connections between real people doing real work. I'm in every single one of those photos, honey. All 200 pounds of me, all 55 years of me standing proud in whatever dress I felt like wearing. And you know what? I look beautiful in every one of them. Because I'm surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not how I photograph. That's the ending to this story. Madison tried to exclude me from her wedding because I didn't fit her perfect vision. Instead, I created something better, a celebration of substance over surface, character over appearance, reality over performance. And my son learned that the right person will love every inch of you, inside and out. They won't ask you to change or hide or apologize for who you are. They'll stand beside you proudly and tell the world how lucky they are to have you in their life. That's what Rachel does for Trevor. That's what Trevor does for Rachel. And that's what family should always do. See your worth, honor your humanity, and love you exactly as you are. Madison wanted perfect wedding photos. I gave her something she didn't expect, a mirror that showed her exactly who she was. What she chose to do with that reflection was up to her. As for me, I stood in my truth, honored my values, and showed my son what it looks like to have self-respect and dignity. And honey, that's a picture worth more than any wedding photo could ever be. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more true stories about standing up for yourself, family dynamics, and finding your self-worth. Have you ever been judged for your appearance by someone who should have loved you unconditionally? Have you witnessed someone value looks over character? Or have you had to teach someone an important lesson about respect and dignity? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter, and this community is here to celebrate real beauty, the kind that comes from character, not a camera lens. Remember, you have every right to set boundaries with people who try to diminish you, even if they're family. Never let anyone make you feel like your worth is determined by how you look in someone else's photos. Stand tall, know your value, and surround yourself with people who see your true beauty, the kind that radiates from kindness, strength, and authenticity. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.